Welcome, everybody. This is Elaine Starling. I'm the host of Why 5% Succeed with really insightful entrepreneurs and small business owners. Their business tools and techniques that you can apply in your business right now to see some spectacular success. Now, I'd love to introduce you to my team first and foremost. Down in the film strip, you'll see a beautiful lady, Debbie Davis. She's going to wave to you right now. Debbie is my Hangout producer. And then next to Debbie, the guy with the full-on headset, is my handsome husband, Dane Starling. He is also a Hangout producer. And even better, I have a fabulous guest with me today. I'm so excited to have Professor Metze join us. He is a very well-rounded, renowned journalist and a professor. He's been a university chancellor. He's taught people how to be effective journalists and how to communicate really, really well in everything that you do about your business. So I'm so excited to have Professor Metze with us today because I'm turning the tables on him. He's used to interviewing us, and this time I get to interview him with your help. We're going to be looking at your questions and comments. Dane and Debbie are going to be looking closely at the things that you want to know and making sure that Professor Metze and I see your questions. Meanwhile, we're going to be focusing in on some great ideas and information that Professor Metze would love to share with you. So even if you're watching a recording of the show, feel free to put your questions or comments in because we will see them and we will come back and respond to make sure you get the information you need most. Professor Metze, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you on the show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I know that this is your very first Hangout. And I kind of cornered you on this one, and you weren't sure what I meant by hangout. In fact, I think you told your wife, no, I'm happily married. I don't do that sort of thing. I'm afraid I turned the tables on you, and I'm so delighted that you were willing to join us today. So I'm going to jump right into it and start with the first of 4 ways that you create incredible value for your clients. Because frankly, when you start showing your clients how they make the money, that's when you start making fabulous money. So the first way is with a rewarding experience. And I want to talk to Professor Metze about what makes information from a small business owner really rewarding for a journalist.
Well, the first thing is to find out, because I cover service and how a business relates to its customers and the type of relationship that those businesses have with their customers. And I think that a rewarding experience is something that is truly unique for the business owner, and it's something that he's giving to the customer. And so there's a possibility for the journalist to actually expose that relationship, to give the public a general understanding of what is being done. The example that I used earlier was there's a business in Ocean City, Maryland that the owner invited me to appear on. It's called, or to interview, it was Harbor House Harbor Watch restaurant. And it's a very, very beautiful, scenic location. It has all the ambiance of the ocean and the sea and that sort of thing. And I told them that you need to really focus on how this setting attracts customers. And so you need to do, the article that I did related to the beautiful setting, it related to the customer service, it related to their sincere desire to bring customers into that business and to make them happy, and to make them feel that they had received something special. And as a result of that, he told me later that he was on over 200 Facebook pages of comments that had been made by customers and people who wanted to come, and that they would increase their participation because of that experience and how he related it in the article. So when you write an article, you never know how many people are going to respond to it. You try to capture the essence of what took place. And that's what I did in that piece, and that's what I try to do with each of my small business owners. I try to give the essence of what they're trying to create.
That's really good insight, because I think the key thing that you said here is, how are you making your clients feel? What is that emotional connection? What problem are you solving? And then how do you help them walk away from that problem feeling a whole lot better than they did before? But I also want to go a little step further than that, because yes, as a business owner, we have to serve our clients. But now you're a journalist, and if I want a relationship with you, I've got to make that relationship, that experience, that first connection really rewarding for you as a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
So what best serves you when I'm reaching out because I want to develop that relationship and I want to get you to write about my business?
I think that first of all, you have to establish a pure contact. Truth and honesty and all that sort of thing is fundamental to any journalist. We're seeking to find the essence of what this situation is about, the essence of what the business is about, and we need to be certain that the information that we get from that business owner related to their business and what they're trying to offer to the public, it's real. It's a real experience. And I think that in many instances, business owners offer services, and the question arises, does that service actually do what the owner says it will do? And you have to make absolutely certain that to maintain a relationship with me as a journalist, or I think any other, is to make certain that the experience that I related to the public is a real experience and the situation is exactly as I said it was. If I in fact go into a business and they say that they offer great service in an area or they have this relationship with their customers, I want to see that. If they're not taking advantage of the publicity, if you will, for any business. They say no news is good news, but publicity always has a fundamental responsibility to tell what is happening here. And journalists always have the who, what, when, where, and why. We want to know, what are you offering, where is it being offered, how is it being offered, and are you executing exactly the way you say you're going to execute? And I think that to the businesses that I've maintained a constant relationship with throughout my reporting and throughout my coverage, they've been consistent. They've constantly offered the same product, the same service. They've been judicious in their relationships with their customers. And I think that relationship is the most important. It's fundamental to the success of any business. And that is why I try to maintain. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it absolutely does. But I also have another, to me, it's a really burning question, because I think it's something that all of us struggle with as small business owners. You're always told it's really good to get publicity, right? And so it's a really good idea to do press releases. Yes. Well, you're a journalist, and I'm sure you get bombarded with requests from individual business owners and entrepreneurs, and you probably get plastered with press releases.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I have a question. How effective are press releases, and is there one burning question that a press release really has to address for it to be valuable to you?
Absolutely. I think that a press release is basically the business reaching out to the press, to the journalists, to say, this is happening, we need you to look into this, we need you to cover it. I never, ever go with a press release unless I know the contact persons, unless I've made contact with the person sending the release. On every press release, there's a contact person. You contact that person and they give you information on the event that they're advertising or on whatever service that they're offering. Modern Enterprise Solutions, fantastic business in Florida. I received a press release concerning their specialized service with their employees, that they actually create an environment with lounges and athletic workout rooms, fitting rooms, all that sort of thing to make the environment better for their employees. And it's been highly praised. I had to talk to the employees to find out, what is your opinion of this service? I had to find out, how long have you utilized this? And once that was clarified and I had pictures of the facilities in both New York and in Florida, I ran the article. They placed it on their Facebook and on their business page because it told the story of what they were doing to maintain their employees, to give great customer service. And that business has one of the highest ratings in Florida for customer service. So that's one of the things that you look for. You try to find ways that you can actualize what took place, because some press releases have information that's just fraudulent. They have information that's just not true. And unless you have spoken to the individual participants who are in that press release and found out, then you can't be sure that you're getting accurate information. A good journalist uses a press release. You use the quotations that are given, because in some instances the CEO may not be able to set up an interview with you that day. But if it's a really sincere enterprise that wants to get that message out, they will provide you with access. And if I can use another example, Clarabridge, outstanding corporation, outstanding business, and I've had an opportunity to talk with the CEO of that company on several occasions, and is always ready to answer my questions honestly, and I can verify what is being said, because the first part of journalist is journal, and that means you write everything down. I write everything down. I've been doing that for quite some time, by the way, as my students in journalism will tell you. I'm a fanatic about writing everything down. And I think that when you keep a journal, and I have 40 journals on my desk behind me from each year going back to 1972. I make absolutely certain that I know what was said. I can go to that page, that date, and I can give a verbatim quote of what was said to me, who said it, and where they said it.
That's great. Now, one of the things that I've always heard about press releases is there has to be some kind of news in there. It can't just be business as usual. It's got to be something novel, something unique, something really timely, something really relevant with what's going on in the world. Is there a certain secret sauce that you're looking for when you get a press release that makes you go, wow, this one out of 100 is something I'm going to follow up on and I'm going to contact that person?
Well, you're correct in that press releases come out at such a volume. You have to shift through those press releases to make certain that it's something that's worthy of your time in covering. There's some events that are spectacular in and of their own right. For example, a press release may be attached to an event that's taking place, such as they had a world viewing party for the World Cup in Washington. And it was anticipated that there was going to be a large following because we have lots of soccer fans with the DC United. I knew instantly that this is an event that would be worthy of coverage because you'd have thousands and thousands of people on Freedom Plaza in Washington watching an event together. And of course, soccer fans, especially in Washington, are very enthusiastic. I covered that event. It was a very, very successful. I believe it was #1 on my page that day. And I try to find events that are going to be interesting to the public, that are worthy of being covered. And I always remember what my journalism department chairman taught me, well, we don't want to get into age here, but about 40 years ago. He said that you have a nose for news. This was a comment that he made. He said, Charles, he said, throughout your career, whether it's in teaching or whether you are working strictly as a journalist, he said you have an understanding of what is important to cover. And he said that's something that's very difficult to teach. Because if the house is burning down behind you and you're talking about the dog that's walking in front of you, you've got a problem. The house would be a bigger story, a better story. You have to focus on what in this event is worthy of being front page news. You know, some newspapers have a slogan that if it bleeds, it leads. That means someone has to die. I don't cover crime. I cover business. I cover small business and customer service. But anytime there's a story that is going to automatically attract attention and will be a story that, in fact, viewers want to hear or see or read, then you need to be there. And you have to develop that sense, is this press release worthy of my time and worthy of the public's time in reading? Now, the grand opening of Walmart, the first Walmart in Washington, that would have been a big story under any circumstance because they've been waiting 22 years, I believe, to finally get a store in this area. They've been trying to do it. And of course, it finally happened this past December. And that was a big news story that day, the first big box store in Washington. And I covered that. And as I said, it's been a popular story for Walmart ever since.
That's great. Now, Debbie is calling my attention to a question from Sheila. Who pays the journalists, Professor Metze, the journals or the small enterprise that you're writing about? Are you doing an independent feature or are people paying you to write about them?
That's a good question, and it helps me to clarify something very important about particularly Examiner.com and other online papers. Now, you know that I was a staff writer paid handsomely by the Columbia News Corporation at the start of my career, and that was when newspapers were having higher budgets, and there wasn't as much of a concern about newspapers going out of business. Well, the paper that I first wrote for is no longer in business because of the advertising revenues. Advertising revenues are falling. Any intelligent person that researches the state of newspapers from the New York Times to all papers, circulation and subscription is a major concern. So what Examiner does is that if you have an interest and a passion for covering an area, then you're enabled, if you will, by the company to cover that area. The payment for that is based on the number of people that you have that are interested in what you're interested in. Having that nose for news comes in handy at this point, because if you're writing articles that the public is going to really be interested in reading, then you're going to have a higher viewership and therefore higher pay. But the point that I like to make is that I don't think any person becomes a journalist strictly with an interest in money. I think bankers do that more often in terms of making profit. Journalists I went into journalism because I wanted to serve the public. I wanted to serve humanity. I wanted to help people. That was actually in my letter of introduction when I signed into my journalism program. I really wanted to be a mild-mannered reporter and to make the world a better place. If you have that kind of orientation, then the payment for your work should come from the work itself. I don't have any third-party sources. As a matter of fact, there was a gentleman that offered me an opportunity to be paid for articles that were submitted. And I told him that I found that to be unethical. That if I don't write an article, if I don't do the groundwork for it, the research for it, and if it's not my own product, then I won't fabricate that I've written something that in fact was not written by me. And I turned him down, and his money. I told him he could take his money and leave. So I think that's the kind of policy you have to have. I understand that every person needs to have a livelihood, which I'm sure the source of her question is based in. They need to have to earn enough money in order for them to live a comfortable lifestyle. But I think if you're really good at what you do, and if you're tenacious, and if you're passionate, and if you don't give up, then I think you can make any venture successful if you have the dedication and the determination to make it successful. And that was my decision 5 years ago when I started writing for Examiner.com.
That's great. That's great. You know what you just said, Professor, is that every single article has to be a rewarding experience for you, and you're trying to figure out what that rewarding experience is for your audience, and you've got to communicate that through every single article. Well, the next thing that you get after you've created that rewarding experience is the second key thing of value, relationships. And obviously the very first thing to do if you would love to have your business covered by Professor Metze is to make sure you start a relationship with him. You've seen that he's got a column in Examiner.com, so you're going to want to subscribe to his column and read his articles and get a feel for his tone of voice, his flavor of commentary. And so I'd love to ask you, what can we as entrepreneurs and small business owners, we want to foster relationships with great journalists like you, what's the best way to establish a relationship with a journalist?
Well, I think the best way, obviously, if it's a larger small business, they have the availability of public relations companies. That I know several public relations individuals that I've become well acquainted with. I don't want to sound off on all of them because there's quite an extensive group, but I'd like to mention the Tamayan Group in Los Angeles. And I've worked very extensively with the Tamayan Group, and I've helped to interview a number of individuals that were represented by that public relations agency. So number one, of course, that requires a budget, and it requires that you have an investment in that company to have the public relations. If you're simply working for the vantage point of contacting a journalist, I have a young woman, and I use young woman in a very, very polite way, who has a small business in Washington, and she was having a great difficulty in getting through to the Department of Defense because she was a small business owner, a woman-owned business, and she emailed me. And she said, I've been trying to gain access to the Department of Defense. I've been trying to get through to this person who is supposed to be the person who's in charge of their public government contracting. And she said, could you write an article about what we're doing here and what is done? So I called the Department of Defense, spoke with the Department of Defense spokesperson who handles all media, regardless of how big or small, and we were able to get in contact with that official and to establish a contact between him and this small business owner, this woman business owner, and she was able to successfully communicate with them. So emailing me, and my email address is on my page. If you have an interest or a concern and you need someone to look into contact, public service means serving the public. Customer service means serving the customers. If that's not being done, you're not getting the responses that you'd like, then I try to help to facilitate that. I try to make certain that I look into stories and cover stories where people have told me they've not been getting a good public response, and especially among government officials and agencies that the DMV I've written stories about. You know, there's always a story in the public being served. And when I started in the business, the articles that I enjoyed covering the most were articles that related to public service and customer service, the United Way. I loved covering events for United Way. Many times the city editor or assignment editor would say, we've got to cover this event with the homeless shelter, do this. And the other reporters would say, and I said, give it to me, give it to me. And I would cover it. And I really felt that this is an important issue. Homelessness is an important issue.
Yeah.
I felt that child abuse is an important issue. So my career was fueled by a passionate desire for us to tell the truth in helping people and speaking truth to power. A lot of people are afraid to say you're not doing your job. You're not helping people. There was a gentleman, we had a hurricane in D.C. That doesn't happen all the time. And I was able to write a story that he couldn't get his ventilation system in. He needed to get that in. Someone read it, that service was provided, and the relationship was rewarding.
That is so wonderful. We've got some more questions from our audience, so I wanted to take a minute to highlight some of the different questions. So, Dane, unfortunately, I can't read that one. Nancy says, Professor Metze, I love your example of having 40 journals in your office. She says she does too. In addition to this type of Google forum, please give us another example of how you've been innovative with new technology in your career in academics and in journalism.
Well, I think that this is the point. You need to read my article on examiner.com, Overcoming the Digital Divide. Now, I told Elaine earlier that my passion for journalism started in 1959. So we're not going to sit here and pretend as if all the technology has been something that's been automatically assumed. Google Hangout now is an incredible service. Google Plus is an incredible device. We're learning as we go. All the apps that were on my smartphone when I first received it, I believe there was 57 apps already loaded onto the phone. I looked at it as if it was a device from Mars. I said, how can I know what these 50 apps represent, what they stand for? Now, if you've been doing this on a continual basis, remember that I taught for 30 years. That's 30. And being in a classroom on a college campus during that period did not afford me the opportunity to expose myself to a lot of the new technology. Now, I had brilliant students like Ryan Heathcock, who now I believe is an executive somewhere and doing video production and that sort of thing. They're acclimated at this from birth. And I try to make certain that I use the technologies that are most helpful. For example, you asked a question about journals. Well, obviously, I can keep more information on my text app than I can actually write on a physical paper journal. But I still use my journals because it's a system that I have. And that's one thing that I refuse to let go of. It's sort of like Guy Talese of the New York Times not giving up his first typewriter. He had a role there. He wouldn't go to a computer at first because we feel that this is the technology that we've used for so many years. And I'm making the change. I want to thank this outstanding program, Why the 5% Succeed, with bringing me into this current century. You would not see me had it not been for this wonderful program, because I stay behind the scenes. I want to say this, CNN in 1979 was recruiting. They were just setting up. They were talking about this new device that was going to be cable, 24-hour news. I said, I'm a print journalist. I went to school for print journalism. I don't want anything to do with this cable business. It's just a fad anyway. Well, it wasn't a fad. Bob Lozier, who was a friend who worked with me at KOTV in Tulsa, he took them up on their offer, and he became the anchorman for the CNN headline news. He wrote to me and said, Charles, I'm really glad you chose to go the route you chose, because you left space for us. And that is true. I think I know that you can make hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars doing things a different way, but I'm a person who believes in fidelity, who believes in principle, and the one thing I give to my readers and my viewers, I'm going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that's something that once you lose it, you can never regain it. And I've had that throughout my career, and I plan to die with that integrity. Well, not today, by the way.
Yeah, hold off on that concept. Now, Dane was kind enough to type Myra's question in so that I could read it clearly. Myra, thank you for asking. In this digital age, how has the format of the press release changed in terms of content and length? And where do you recommend posting press releases? Should it go on your company website, in your Twitter feed, on Facebook? Are there certain news release sites that you find extremely reputable and you tend to focus on those press releases more than other sources you might receive?
I think, number one, I'd like to recommend to her PR Newswire. PR Newswire. Just Google it. It is one of the leading PR, public relations, press release services in the nation. It is reputable. Generally, if you find a press release on PR Newswire, you know that that press release has been vetted in a sense, and so it saves a lot of time. The other thing is that press releases are written in a format now that is basically the same format that press releases were written in when I was writing for the Columbia Record. They're written in a way that the person conveys the who, what, when, where, why, and how of whatever they're trying to communicate. That has not changed. Basically, what you're trying to do, people's attention span definitely has changed. When you're posting an article that's going to be on a smartphone, people are flipping through it. They don't have time to read extensively all the information that's in that article from that press release at the time. You need to get as much of that information in the lead as possible. What I try to do when I get a press release, and I have several examples of press releases that I've written where I've spoken to the person who wrote the press release, I've gotten the very basic facts of what was in that event, then I've done my research to verify that that's all true, and I've gone with the press release. Press releases are written so that that information is conveyed exactly the way they want it to be conveyed. So if you want to make certain that you don't leave out any details, you want to make certain that you convey the exact time, date, and place for an upcoming event, then you want to stay as closely with the information in the press release as possible. There's not very much room for freelancing. If you want to check with quotes that are given to make certain that all of those are accurate, then you can do that. But for the majority of the press releases I receive, and that's thousands and thousands and thousands, it's a question of verifying the details of that event, making certain that it's true, that it's real, and that you trust the people who are sending it to you.
That's great. I want to share another resource that I've discovered recently that I found extremely valuable. It's called prreach.com. And what I really like about prreach.com is that they take your press release, they take key highlights that you've identified from the press release, the core message, and they have somebody on a news set videotaped reading your press release as a story. Mm-hmm. And it's really just that key highlight that is read on the news structure in the news stadium. And so then that goes out, that video goes out in conjunction with your press release all across the web and through some of the more traditional distribution sites as well. So it's a really good way, prreach.com, to get more exposure. And Debbie's identified another question. Okay, RJ, as a former student, I have to share that Professor Metze has been the genuine article since I left his classroom in 1993. Thank you for staying committed to helping humanity. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Now, I do have to go on to one other thing, because that's a perfect segue into the third thing, which is reputation, right?
Well,
that's what's so powerful.
I want to thank Ryan for his comments, because he was one of my good students in 1993. But Ryan, telling people you were my student in 1993 dates me considerably. You realize that. And I'm trying to tell people that I'm only, well, I don't tell them anything, but I think you can see my hair. So, but no, I have not changed throughout my career. And I believe the one thing that I can give to the public and to anyone that's listening to this broadcast is I can tell you that I am faithful to my principles. I'm faithful to my wife. I'm faithful to my children. I'm faithful to my life. I believe that I've been given a wonderful life. I've been able to do all the things that I dreamt of doing since 1959. The university that Ryan is referring to is Howard University, where I was the Professor of the Year in 1998, thanks to great students like Ryan. I was also the Distinguished Faculty Member of the Year. But journalism and writing was the basis that got me there. I started as a writer, and I'm very, very happy that Examiner.com is allowing me to end my career as a writer. And I want to make this clear to everyone listening. I will stay with Examiner.com until I write my last page. So I won't be going anywhere. So all of the other companies that have written to me to ask me if I'd like to write for their paper, no, I'm loyal to the one that brought me. My father said, always dance with the one who brought you. And Examiner.com brought me back into journalism some 30 years after the Columbia Record, and I love Examiner.com. I love the organization and the people that I work with. But to talk about reputation, one story that I want to give, and I want this to be very clear to everyone listening. When I was a journalism student in journalism school with this dream, my idol was the newspaper and journalist who reported the story on the death of President John F. Kennedy, whom I deeply loved. And it was a story that caused great sensation, as you can imagine, across the world. But he reported that story from Dallas, and he did it with such integrity, with such clarity. I said that that's the kind of reporter you want to be. And his name was Dan Rather. I'm sure you all remember him. And Dan Rather was at CBS News for the majority of the time after Walter Cronkite that I was studying journalism. But there was a question raised about a story that Dan reported on. And we don't know all the details, and I'm not going to get into that from a legalistic sense. But the question was, the documents that went in that story were fabricated, and they were not real. They were not true. The producer who presented it was fired, and of course, Dan Rather left CBS News later. But there was always a question mark there. So I make certain that when I receive information from any person, that I do my due diligence, my fiduciary responsibility as a reporter, to prove that this is true. And that's really the hard work that goes into journalism. And once you lose your reputation, you'll never regain it. In the entire time that I taught, I never had a single student to come to me and say, "You have not presented to us exactly what you said you would present to us. You have been exactly as you promised you would be." Reputation is the basis of everything that you do, not only in journalism, but in small business. If you sell a product in your business that's not a real product, that's not a worthy product, that's a faulty product, and you deceive your customers, they're never going to let you forget that. They're always going to remind you of that, and you will lose business. So it is better to be honest. It is better to be true. It's better to be real, if you will, rather than to fabricate, to deceive, and to dupe. Because there are many, many people who work 24 hours a day, if possible, to produce that sort of thing. And that's why we have all these filters on our computers, because they're scammers and they're sending out information that's not true. And once you have been conned by someone, you never forget it. So reputation means it takes a lifetime to build. You can lose it in a second.
That is so true. That is so true. But I want to take this a little step further for our audience, or the people who are watching today, because reputation is something that you can build through relationships with journalists. One of the things that I love about getting exposure from great journalists like Professor Metze is that it's almost a third-party endorsement about your business. It's somebody else from the outside looking in and commenting on what you're doing. So they're really helping position you in the marketplace and really help share who you're being. And so there's certain things that I really teach all of my clients to do to really enhance the relationships that they have with journalists, and also enhance their own reputation and the reputation of the journalists at the same time. The very first thing you want to do is connect. Reach out. Follow Professor Metze on Examiner.com. Read his column. The second thing is comment on the columns. Provide feedback. Provide a question. Share an example of something that reinforces something in his article. Commenting is huge. The third thing is share. Share it out with your network. We have social media now. You are only 4 degrees of separation from anybody on the planet that uses social media. If they don't use social media, you won't know them. But honestly, it is a small world, and you are far more connected than you give yourself credit for. So reputation is something that you have. It's something the journalist has, and really, we need to be proactive in helping the journalist get exposure. Professor Metze, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think that you're absolutely correct. Comments are extremely important because it shows you the audience that's listening to what you're writing. But in another regard, the impact that an article has on a business is substantial. And it also helps to clarify things. We have a role. A journalist has a role not only to convey a story, but to convey all of the essence of that story, the surrounding information, the esoteric information. To give another good example, H&R Block is a tax preparer. I'm sure you've all heard of H&R Block. I worked with an H&R Block preparer who's been in the business for 40 years. He, in fact, had one customer who felt disgruntled about his service. Yelp is being used extensively by many people to complain about businesses. Yet in many instances, those complaints are not based on factual information. They're based on a one-time experience, or perhaps even someone's feeling about a business. So I received a comment from the Netherlands after publishing the article from a former customer of this tax preparer with a problem, said he couldn't get it resolved. In one day, through that article, the tax preparer contacted that person, they clarified the problem, and he still saw H&R Block as an outstanding tax preparing agency from that preparer. I believe that is what a journalist does. Journalists help to bring clarity. Remember, clarity was the original name of the company. Clarity to any instance, clarity to any situation. If I see something, any journalist that sees it clearly with a clear eye, they should be able to convey the essence of that situation. And that's where all of my years of writing experience comes in. Why do you go to journalism school 4 years? Why do you take 2 years of graduate studies in journalism? What's the point? The point is to define all of these skills, to highlight them, to refine them, so that when you're actually in the field, you can think in a split second, this is the avenue that I need to take, this is what needs to be focused on, I'll convey that to the audience.
That's really great. And there's something that you mentioned that I really want to highlight here. Because one of the things that you were saying is it's not so much that a mistake was made. Yes, it's a problem that a mistake was made. One of your clients is unhappy. A lot of people, unfortunately, stick their heads in the sand. They're like, they don't want to hear it. They're trying to plug their ears and avoid that there's this issue. In reality, if you take the time to address the problem and try your best to solve the problem in a very prompt way, it's amazing what that does to the relationship. You actually strengthen the relationship that you have with your client. People know you're not perfect. People know life is busy and hectic and crazy and things happen. It's how well you deal with adversity and how quickly you try to resolve the problem that really, really makes a difference. I'm sure you've seen that over and over again with some of the different businesses you've worked with, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The thing is when I tell small business owners, when you tell me about a problem or I ask you about a problem with your business, don't try to cover it up. Once you admit that problem, once you reconcile it, then it can be dealt with. You're right about burying your head in the sand, because many people believe that, again, no news is good news. If I can hide this, or if I can keep the public from knowing about it, everything will be just fine. No, it won't. They'll go on the site, it won't work. They'll go on whatever they use, whatever product it is that doesn't work. So what I try to do is I try to find out what is the essence of this particular problem, what is the problem with that the customer sees, what is the complaint that the customer is making, and I have another good example if I have time.
Yeah.
There's a barber in Washington that I've written about, and he had a customer to come into his shop, and she wanted a haircut. This gentleman has never done female hair. He doesn't know how. He's a barber. And he told her in a polite fashion, I simply don't know. I've never done, I'm not trained. I'm trained as a male barber. She went on Yelp and gave the most searing criticism of his business that he's ever had. I have been with this particular barber for 22 years. He's a gentleman. He always does a great job. So I wrote an article about the service he has provided, not the service that was at one time. I'm talking about 22 years. Now, which person are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to a person who's been in the business once and filed a complaint? Or are you going to listen to a person who's been in the business for 22 years and reported what they've seen? It goes back to honesty. Honestly conveying the experience. And I think that if you have a problem, it's an honest problem. You said everyone makes mistakes. The first article written on me after I was appointed chancellor of the university in Mali said that I am Charles Metze III, that's my son, and that I attended Northeastern University in Boston. I have never spent a night in Boston. I went to Northeastern Oklahoma State with Carrie Underwood, or that Carrie Underwood attends, in Oklahoma. And so that will always be there, because you can't change what is printed. Now, they wrote a correction the next day that we interviewed Charles Metze II, and he attended Northeastern State in Oklahoma. But the point, anyone reads that article, many people have asked me, how did you like living in Boston? And I'll say, I've never lived in Boston. Yes, I read about it in the newspaper. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So basically, that happened. So the great thing about Examiner.com, yes, mistakes will be made, and any person that thinks you can write an article without making a mistake has a serious problem. But you can correct those problems. If you see a quote that's not correct or a sentence that's not correct, email me. Tell me, Professor Metze, you forgot to put this person in the article or whatever. I can make the correction instantaneously because I have full editorial control.
That is great. Now, I want to go slightly on a tangent because RJ has a very intriguing question for you. And he's talking about the new film called The Messenger.
Ah,
It's based on the life of Gary Webb. And he wants to know if you feel that this level of commitment to reporting really places you in harm's way or in threat of damaging your reputation. Now, most of us are small business owners. We're not going to come after you with knives and guns and stuff. We'd really like a nice review of our business. But, do you feel that your reputation is even more in jeopardy, even more in today's fishbowl environment?
well, I think that the first thing that you have to consider is that when you make the decision to become a journalist, if that's a pure decision, I declared my journalism major my freshman year because I've been editor of my high school paper, an editor on my high school paper, and I've been in journalism and had a love for it my entire life. It's what I wanted to do at the end of my career. So I, in fact, believe that you take a risk in being a journalist. I mean, there's a sign that I saw once. It said, "No dogs or journalists allowed." So basically, that's the feeling that many people have about journalists. Many people are going to hate you because you are a journalist. Not that you've done anything, but they see press and they say, well, all journalists are no good. You're up to no good. You're trying to cause trouble. I believe that we have to stay with the original purpose of a journalist, back to the penny press, back to the hawker on the street. We were there to call attention to a problem. We were there to say, wake up, look, listen, this is going to happen. This is coming. We need to prepare for it. If a journalist does not do that, he's not doing his job. I was invited to attend the IRS scandal protest in Washington, and I have no involvement with any groups because as a journalist, I'm required to be like Sweden, neutral. I have no public political affiliation. I have to keep all of that private. My private self is separated from my work as a journalist. But when I went to the event, I was surrounded by possibly 20,000 people. I've never seen so many people packed in Washington on the Capitol, running into the streets, and they were turning to me and saying, "Do your job, do your job." And I was saying, what are you talking about? What job? And they were basically saying reporters in Washington were not covering the IRS scandal. They were covering it up. And I said, listen, I'm an honest journalist. If I see a problem, if I know that there's been an infraction made against the Constitution of the United States of America, I'm going to respond to it. It's my fundamental purpose as a journalist. So I wrote about that article. Honestly, I received a lot of negative comments from people saying that they didn't want me to write about that. But as a journalist, you must not allow political bias or any other kind of bias to stop you from doing your job. That's what the people were talking about. And I'll write about that just as well as I'll write about sanitation workers who are protesting unfair wages. Whatever the issue is, the journalist's job is to remain non-biased. It's to remain nonpartisan. You have to stay apart from it. It means a solitary life, which isn't a problem for me because I love to stay in my office and read if I'm not doing anything else. So you restrict yourself. And to give you one other incident, when I started, I was on the Northeastern newspaper, Northeastern. This is an article you can Google. It's been placed online. That article was over a protest where someone said, "Are you biased or not?" I resigned from every organization I was in so I could devote myself to my journalism. And that's been my staple. When I signed on with Examiner.com, I became a member of the working press. My job is to tell the truth regardless of the circumstance.
That's very admirable, and I think it's a really good reminder to everybody in the audience. As a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, when you're trying to get exposure in the press, it's not just your reputation on the line, it's also the reputation of the journalist who is covering your business. So they are going to be very careful and very proactive. If they choose to work with you, they want to see a track record. They want to see a level of trust that gets established, that they can count on you for reliable, accurate information in a very timely manner. Now, I know we're getting a little short on time, so I want to move on to the fourth kind of value you provide, which is revenue. And I know that there's a lot that you can get from involvement with the media and getting exposure with journalists. And there's three different ways that we talk about revenue here. The first way is, how does being in the media help you make more money? Professor?
This is a question that is the fundamental reason that Examiner.com is in business and other newspapers and news organizations. People respond to the press, the power of the press. People respond to information. Information is power. If you have a small business, and that's the reason I stayed with small business, because they're businesses that most people would not cover because it doesn't generate the type of interest that, say, a bigger story. This is October. We're about to celebrate Halloween. Every person at Halloween needs a pumpkin. You have to have a pumpkin. So one Halloween, I said, you know what? I'm going to do a story on a pumpkin patch. I'm going to go to a pumpkin patch. I'm going to stay in the pumpkin patch. I'll be with the pumpkins all day. I did a story on the Why Worry Farm pumpkin patch. They hadn't had a story like that. The next week, I went to the pumpkin patch. There was no place to park. The pumpkin patch was completely covered with vehicles, SUVs, station wagons, people loading pumpkins into their cars. And the owner told me, Mark Siebel Sr., you have helped to generate revenue for our business. He even wanted to give me a free pumpkin. But I said, I'm a journalist. I can't tolerate any gratuities. So I took the pumpkin. But what I'm saying is you want to make certain that you realize when you're talking to a journalist, you're talking to revenue. We're not there for that purpose. We're not there. We're there to cover the story. But if you have something that the public wants, and we tell them where to come and get it, when you're going to offer it, and what great quality it is that you're offering, we're doing our job. They will have revenue from that article. They will have customers from that article. And if they treat those customers right, if they give them good customer service, those customers will be back. They'll be back the next week or the next Halloween. That's the truth.
That is fabulous. And I love your stories. I love your examples. They're so right on. Okay, the second kind of revenue is it helps you save money. I know a lot of people spend a fortune on marketing, and they're trying to find different ways to get the word out. How do you think journalists can help you actually save money in your business?
I believe that the monies that are spent for advertising, which is what we're all in. I mean, every newspaper, obviously, television stations, what have you, they have to have ad revenue in order for them to stay in business. The goal here is to place your interest where it will give you the best return in terms of savings. If the example that I just gave, they probably didn't have a budget to do radio and television advertising for their pumpkin patch. So Examiner.com was perfect because I focus on local stories. I focus on small business. I focus on what they needed. So by pairing my interest with the owner's interest, we were able to create a winning combination. And that's why they succeeded and why they're still in business today. And incidentally, you talked about relationships with the journalists. I receive emails, calls, and updates from that story 4 years ago. Every single week, I'll have some comment made or someone will contact me in relationship to that. That's one of the reasons that I can't answer all of your emails in a rapid fashion. There are quite a number of emails. So what I try to do is I try to let them know that once they get to know you. Now remember, when you first meet a journalist, there is suspicion. That's something that you find. It's called journalistic suspicion. They'll look at you like, what do you really want? What are you really up to? What are you trying to uncover? What are you trying to do? You're here on some undercover mission. Are you the police? What do you want? They're always asking me questions to verify that I'm simply here to help you. I'm here to convey a truth and to explain to the public what you're doing and to ask them to come into your business. But after they find out that you are truly the real article, that you have the integrity and the reputation, they get to know you, you'll never lose that source. They will continue to come back to you. They'll continue to keep you updated. They'll even invite you to family functions, because you become part of a positive experience related to the truth, okay? I'll tell you something else later, but I won't go into that now. It's a Columbia record story.
Ooh, this is juicy. Okay, so there is the third kind of revenue, which is where you make your clients feel like $1 million. And I gotta say, you're making all of us feel pretty darn good with these great stories, great examples. But how does being in the media make a small business owner, make an entrepreneur feel really great?
Well, number one, if you have a good business, if your small business is a business that you've built up throughout your life, if you focus on that, and let me be very clear, Walmart did not start as the largest retailer in America. Walmart started as a small store in Benton, Arkansas, just across from the border of northeastern Oklahoma, which I've been to, and they grew into the mega industry, the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today. I focus on the small business. I focus on the fact that Sam Walton had a dream. He had one single store that he had faith in, and he dedicated his life to it, and it grew. Every small business owner has something that you're extremely proud of. A man walked into a pottery shop, saw a Harvard medical degree on the wall. He asked the person, whose medical degree is that? She said, that's mine. He said, you're making pots and you have a medical degree? She said, the medical degree is for my father, the pots are for me. She wanted to make pots, and she was proud of it. So she put her heart and soul into making those pots. Every small business owner had a dream, and they invested their life savings, their families, into that dream. And to see it work, to see it bloom, to see it make money, to see it prosper. And here I have to talk about a dear friend of mine who started out in his business about 30 years ago because he loved to style hair. His name is Dominique Greco. And he created a beauty salon that he dearly loved. It is now one of the most successful beauty salons in its area because he has that same love and commitment in 2014 that he had in 1974. He believed in his business, and it grew, and it grew, and he's made substantial money from that business. Making that million, and I'm sure that many small business owners wait to make that first million, it begins with the same principle. Have a product that people love. Have a product that people need. Advertise that product, and follow Benjamin Franklin's model. Early to bed, early to rise, work like heck, and advertise.
Words to live by. I find you so inspiring, Professor Metze. I am all out of questions, but I know you have just mastered this topic, and you've taught it for so many years. You are a consummate professional. Is there one last thought that you'd really like to leave our viewers with that would really help them in their business?
I would. I think that any small business owner, as I said, starts with that dream. In 1969, I worked in a small business. I remember working in that small business as a greeter, greeting people. A man walked in, and I greeted him with the same enthusiasm I do every day. I greeted him with, welcome to this business. It's so glad to have you here. And he was overwhelmed by that enthusiasm. He showed more teeth than any man had ever seen when he smiled. You saw all of his teeth. That man, and this is a true story, in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, 1969, was none other than Jimmy Carter, the future president of the United States of America. When I made that greeting, it wasn't because I knew who he was. I made that greeting because, as I learned from a brilliant customer servant by the name of Rick Middleton, who told me you always give the customer 100%. You always treat each person that walks into your business as if they're the salt of the earth and you're so glad to see them. When you do that and you mean it sincerely, your business will prosper. If you try to use chicanery, if you try to use deception, if you try to use deceit, your business will fail. It may take some time, but eventually it will fail. The 5% succeed, I would say, because they believe with all their hearts in the business that they have produced. They believe in the service they're providing. They believe in the customers that they represent. That's good business, and that's good sense. My best business partner is my wife of 30 years. Boy, was that ever a great decision when I decided to marry her, because she has saved my life. And for that reason, I'll be faithful to that woman until I die. And here on this national broadcast, I've never been unfaithful to my wife and never will be. I love her. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. And thank you so much for that really wonderful reminder that it does start with a rewarding experience. It really does. And when we look at businesses that are thriving right now, Zappos, companies like Starbucks, you go to a Starbucks, they treat you like a long-lost friend. They know your name. They know your favorite drink. You know, you're buddies from day one. You need to do the same thing for your clients. Now, there are other great tips in my book, Why 5% Succeed, the 5 Principles of Predictable Profit. It's available on Amazon.com. Professor, unfortunately, we are out of time today, but if anybody has additional questions for Professor Metze, by all means, do post them in the comments on the event page here, and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll see you next week on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.